Good evening. This is a little bit later than I meant for it to be, but we had some folks over and then a couple of things to get done. And so now I'm just now getting to this. So I'm sorry about that. I try to do this after the lesson so that I make sure that I include anything. I'm going to give you a brief recap of this morning's lesson, and it will be brief. You can go ahead and open up to Matthew 5. We're continuing our study in the Sermon on the Mount tonight. Before we get into the study, I'm going to ask you to continue to remember Olivia Whiteside in your prayers. She's in the ICU at Murray Regional with corona complications that are pretty serious. And so I was informed earlier today that she may not have corona, that corona is not showing up at the moment, but I don't know what that means. And I just know that she's still in pretty bad health, and I'll continue to pray for her. She's got blood clots in both lungs, and pneumonia is present in both lungs. And so we want to just hope for the best and pray for the best and trust God to sort it out. We talked a little bit about this morning about just what it means to live in trust. And the best way to kind of work through this time is to, I think, move and operate as if you have no fear of what the virus will do to you. That doesn't mean you don't take precautions or wear a mask or that you don't refrain from social distancing. I don't mean that. I just mean that we can't live paralyzed by the fear of what the virus might do to ourselves. That we have reason, biblical reason, to hope and trust and believe that, as the Psalm says and is quoted in Hebrews, what can man do to me? God is with me. I shall not fear. That as long as we're living in God's trust, then hopefully we won't get the disease. And if we do, and even if the worst happens, it's okay. We sang the song, "It Is Well With My Soul," this morning, and that's a perfect example. Though Satan may buffet me, though tempest may blow, that the world ends, it's okay. We're going to be at peace. And I think that's the one half of what we do, that we live without fear of what will happen to us. Take necessary precautions. We don't want to act recklessly, but no reason to fear. On the other hand, we show the love of Christ to those around us. So we do absolutely everything we can do to keep from spreading the virus. And I think that's the Christian way to handle this, without fear for what will happen to you, and totally conscious that your actions may impact somebody else. And if we do that, then I think we're in pretty good shape. So I say that because of Olivia's situation and that this corona thing is not going away. So we keep praying for the plague to pass, but we've got 1,000 people in this country a day dying from it. So it's real, and it's a valid and serious threat to many, many people. But we put our trust in God, and we take care of our neighbor, and that's what we do. That's all I've got to say about that. You can go ahead, like I said, and switch to Matthew 5 if you would like. We have been studying this book about how to see and to follow Jesus. And last week we started in chapter 5 with the Sermon on the Mount. And I mentioned that I think you see, a glimpse of the divine. You see Jesus. You see God through Jesus, as John puts it, that nobody has seen God, but we have seen him through him. That's what we're told in John 1. And I think you see that really clearly in the Sermon on the Mount. And so if you haven't studied the Beatitudes, we looked at them last week, and I compared them to these stepping stones, this kind of way to measure your spiritual maturity, that you can kind of walk your way through them and see where you're at. And that's something that maybe we should take a mental account of. Are you a peacemaker? Do you hunger and thirst for righteousness? Are you, meek? Are you poor in spirit? That you can go from one step to another as you work your way towards your goal. And it makes an excellent study. I got that idea from Marlon Connolly from hearing a lesson he presented, and I thought it's always stuck with me. Today, we're going to continue in Matthew, but as we do, I want to tell you a little bit. We talked this morning about social influencers. Now, you may not even know what a social influencer is, but this is one of these people who uses their platform, their social media platform, to promote products or to advertise something, and they get paid for that. And people with lots of followers on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok can get paid as much as $250,000 a post. Kylie Jenner gets paid over $1 million a post for her Instagram post if they're advertised post. That's crazy. And it's because people are influenced by that. But then I thought about it. We're all influenced by peer pressure, by what other people say. Is this restaurant any good? Tell me what you think. You went to the beach what beach did you go to? What hotel did you stay in? We um, are clearly impacted by the way other people around us live and act. And the vice versa is also true. But we are clearly influenced by others. Um, that idea is kind of a key idea for today's lesson. We're only going to look at 4 verses really, in Matthew 5 today. But they deal with this concept. So if you want to look at Matthew 5, you can read it while I'm reading if you would like. I'm going to start in the verses that follow right after this, the Beatitudes in verse 13. But these verses kind of pick up on that idea. We are all influenced by others. And it says this, verse 13, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Salt of the earth, light of the world. Very clearly about the impact we have on other people. So we showed this idea that we're influenced by others, and this is about how others influence us. Look at this slide just for a second, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. When I was a kid, every Sunday afternoon we would eat for lunch. A lot of times it was roast or meatloaf, and so often the sides were mashed potatoes and green beans. Now, of the things on that plate, you can eat meatloaf unseasoned. I wouldn't recommend it. If it's cooked thoroughly, you could probably eat it. But potatoes, and particularly green beans, without any salt, are nearly unedible. You notice it when the salt is absent from something that should be there. Benny Morton pointed out to me today that you can also notice it when there's too much salt. That when people oversalt things, that's also noticeable. And I think that that's a good point to remember here for just a second. A little bit goes a long way. So when Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored?" There are some biblical critics who say that that's impossible, that salt never loses its flavor. Well, I think they're being a little too literally minded there. This is a parable, after all, a kind of a comparison, a metaphor. And the point is, if the salt doesn't taste like salt, it's not worth anything. Christians are supposed to be the salt of the earth. And I think a hard question for us, many of us, has always been this one. How do we live like salt? How do we live like salt in the world? What does that even mean? I was listening to a sermon this week by Timothy Keller, and he used Deuteronomy 6, and I think that he wasn't talking about being the salt of the earth, but as I listened to that, I realized just how clearly that one passage pointed that out, what salt-like living looks like. The true salt life, like you see on the backs of cars and trucks and things, people who like to go to the beach. This is Deuteronomy 6, verse 1 through verse 8. "Now this is the commandment, the statutes, and the rules that the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all the statutes and commandments which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long." That's the first 2 verses of Deuteronomy 6. Isn't that what we're all going for? Who are the people that we're most likely to influence? Green beans and mashed potatoes are not elaborate, fancy foods, but they're everyday foods. They're foods people eat a lot because they're cheap, they're good, they're nutritious, and when you add salt to them, they're delightful. Who do we have the most opportunity to influence? We can talk about people that we very rarely see, or go in the mission field and try to reach people way across the world, but who we most have the most ability to influence are the people in our homes, our children, our grandchildren, our son, and our son's son. I want my kids and their kids to be faithful. Being salt starts at home, and then it goes to your work, and then to the people you interact with every day. It's concentric circles. People you influence the most are the people closest to you. So what does we hear in Deuteronomy 6? Hear then, O Israel, be careful to do them, talking about the law, that it may go well with you, that you may multiply greatly as the Lord your God, your fathers, has promised you, a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. So how do we influence people in our lives? Salt. We let salt permeate every part of who we are. We've seen this law before, the one that I'm about to show you right now. We've seen that a million times. Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. To be salt is to incorporate God into the everyday matters of your life, the everyday moments of your life. And that's magnified in this passage in Deuteronomy 6. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk to them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise. That's being salt. Every moment, every day. The simple things in life. God permeates all of it. When you wake and when you lie down, in your heart and your mind, He's everywhere. So we need a plan to do what He says here in verse 8. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. How are you going to put these things on the doorpost of your heart? How are you going to let this be reflected in your life? Where will people see that God's Word is primary? In other words, what's your front porch in the way you live, and that people can see that? I don't know the answers, but I do know that being the salt of the earth means that every day of your life is full of this mentality that you let the world see in every moment. In the way you talk, in the way you dress, in the way you treat other people, that Christ is present. That somebody could watch you for a month, for a week, for a day, for an hour, and not know that faith played an integral role of your life. That's what we're talking about. That's what it means to be the salt of the earth. The last thing we're going to look at today is that last little part, verses 14 through 18 back in Matthew 5. You are the light of the world. The city set on a hill cannot be hidden. He gives light to all that shines, so let your light shine so that people can glorify your Father who's in heaven, because they see your good works. And I didn't read it word for word, but that's what it says. A light on a hill cannot be hidden. This is Mont Saint-Michel in France. John 3, Jesus said to Nicodemus that people love the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light. We believe that we live in a time where the light shines everywhere. But we don't. We live in a time of darkness. So I think the question we need to be asking is, what good works do we do that show the light? Much like being the salt, we let our light shine, like the little kid's song says, in how we live every day. 1 Timothy 2 describes to men and women how they can live. In verse 2, it says that we pray for people so that we can lead a peaceful and a quiet life. Sometimes we think we have to be flamboyant and attract a lot of attention, that people notice our faith, that our faith has to be loud. It's not the biblical image. It has to be consistent. And he says, living this peaceful and quiet life, in verse 3 says, this is good and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior. Verse 8, he says, I desire everywhere that men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. In verse 9, he says that women should adorn themselves in respectful apparel and modesty and self-control, not with braided hair, gold, or pearls, or costly apparel, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. And ultimately, in verse 15, he says that woman will be saved through childbearing. It's a strange verse, but what do all those things have in common? Childbearing, self-control, modesty, not losing your temper, quiet and peaceful. Those are everyday works. So when we ask this question, how does a person show God's light? I think the answer is that we do it in the everyday moments of life. that darkness is shining, and in the darkness the light shines. And in a dark world, if you are kind and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love, humble, modest, quietly going about your job as a father or a mother or as a good worker, then you're letting your light shine. And a little bit goes a long way. In the darkness, the light shines. In a cave, if you go through a cave tour, they light a little lamp and people can see it for forever. A small little match is very visible in total darkness. We live in close to total darkness. So in closing today, I think it's important to know that the light is needed now. That if this statement is true, that we are influenced by others, then the opposite is true. Others are influenced by us. So we live in a way that is totally consistent with this view in our everyday walk. That in everyday moments we show that we are quietly dependent on Him. Like a little kid with their hand in His hand. That we are walking with our hand in His, and it's plain to the world to see. Now, I didn't make up this last slide, but I think it tells us what we're doing. It's time for us as Christians to pour on the salt and turn on the light. To let our faith be visible in the way that we live every day. To live in ways that are contrary to the common ways of the world. We don't have to turn it up 1,000 degrees. We don't have to use a spotlight or a laser to show our light to people that it blinds them, or to pour on so much salt that people die. We just need to be in every moment of our life, in the way that we talk, the way that we act, with our kindness and our love, show that we're different from those in darkness. That's a pretty good summation of today's lesson. I hope it's profitable to you, and reminds you to continue to pray for Olivia. Next week we'll continue in Matthew 5 if you want to read ahead, and hopefully we'll all be able to see each other before too long. Thanks, and have a great night.